Well, Rebel News loves farmers for obvious reasons. I mean, that's where the food comes from. I mean, look at me. But more seriously, though, if you want to have a happy society, a prosperous society, you have to have plentiful, affordable energy and plentiful, affordable food. It's very interesting to me that Donald Trump has teamed up with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and one of his focuses is make America healthy again. He has a pharmaceutical industry part of that policy, but he also talks about healthy food. We don't really think or talk about that much, but it's bizarre to me that countries would declare war against their own farmers. We saw it over the last couple of years in the Netherlands, one of the largest agricultural exporters in the world, even though it's geographically a small country. There, they were doing so in the name of environmentalism, just the same way as we demonize energy by demonizing carbon, that element of the periodic table. They were going after nitrogen, which is part of the fertilizers that farms use. In the UK, the war has been declared against farmers by the new Labour Prime Minister Keir Starmer, but I don't even think he's pretending that it's a global warming threat. I think he just doesn't like the fact that farmers are, generally conservative. They are property owners, and I think there's a class issue there. And so he's brought in a policy that farmers will have to pay a 20% inheritance tax before bequeathing the land to their family. But of course, as you know, farms may be valuable on paper, but farmers are not cash rich. If you have land that presumably is worth, let's say, $1 million or £1 million, you don't have that cash sitting around. So if you're going to bequeath it to your kids and have to pay £200,000 for the pleasure of doing so, that's basically a way of expropriating your property and making way for developers or other non-FAR uses. So today, in the heart of London, in Westminster, in the parliamentary precincts, tens of thousands of farmers did something that I don't think they've done in years, perhaps decades. They converged in the city to say no to Keir Starmer and his war on farms. I love going over to the UK myself, but I wasn't there. But one of our alumni, who is a commentator and a journalist in his own right, our friend Lewis Brackpool, was there in the heart of London. We asked him if he could join us today to give us a bit of an update, and he said yes. What a delight to be joined again on screen by our friend Lewis Brackpool. Lewis, great to see you again.
Yeah, you too, Ezra. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh boy, it looked great. I mean, even British farmers have that classy fashion. Like, it's just, there's something wonderful about British farmers. I mean, of course, I love Canadian farmers too, but I mean, they've been farming for centuries there, and this really is a war against farmers. Tell me a little bit about it. What do the farmers say is really going on?
So, firstly, farmers are being squeezed in terms of income. So I actually have some number crunch for you here. They've already taken a huge drop of income as it is by nearly 70% currently. So the average income from livestock farming is generating around 17.3K annually per year. To top this off with this inheritance tax, now Rachel Reeves has said, the person who's in charge of this budget and introducing as well this inheritance tax, say they will only affect that 76 roughly percent of farmers won't be affected by this. This is actually false. It'll actually affect over 60% of working farms, despite the government believing that it will only affect just quote unquote the wealthy. We had recently Jeremy Clarkson as well being there, and of course taking questions from the media. As soon as I arrived, I saw Clarkson there in great spirits, despite of course the reason why everyone was there. I even saw a real diverse amount of people there politically. You saw the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, was there. Ed Davey of the Liberal Democrats, and Nigel Farage being there. I must say, to put criticism towards this, you had the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the leader of the Conservative Party, all being able to speak and give speeches. But when Nigel Farage arrived and was in the press box and was talking to the press, he was ready to go on to make a speech, and he wasn't allowed, which I thought was very, very odd. I have a big problem with the establishment because my trust, my cynicism is at an all-time low. Joining Rebel News as well years ago when COVID was the main topic, and I remember going to all the protests for you guys. So my trust in the government is already low as it is. So seeing these establishment talking heads getting on stage and using it as political opportunism wasn't great. And obviously the reception from farmers and supporters of the farmers showed that. But you saw as well a clip that had been going around of Jeremy Clarkson being interviewed by the BBC, Victoria Derbyshire, her name is, where she was probing Mr. Clarkson on, well, where are we going to get the money from to pay for things such as public health services? And just to put it in perspective, this inheritance tax will only raise at around £560 million. Now, someone worked this out online. That's roughly around 25 hours of funding for the NHS. 25 hours. So to put that into perspective, billions are being sent to, firstly, Ukraine, and in foreign aid to places like India, where the GDP of India is, of course, higher than the UK, not to mention billions being spent, £8 million a day being spent on housing illegal migrants across the UK and the population increase. So it's convenient that Victoria Derbyshire doesn't mention any of these things.
You said so many things there, Lewis, and I just want to jump in to catch some of our folks up. By the way, NHS is the National Health Service. That's the British version of our Medicare system. I just want to show a quick clip. You mentioned Jeremy Clarkson. He's famous. He's a bit of a TV celebrity in the UK, famous for his automobile reviews. He's lately set up a farm and sort of done a reality show of farming. And it's sort of wonderful to watch this guy get a deep respect for farmers, and he set up a country pub. I just want to play quickly him. He's an old hand at media. Sparring with the BBC was sort of beautiful. I just want to show that to folks before we get too far away from it. Here's Jeremy Clarkson. You may recognize him from various British TV shows. Most recently, he's brought a city man's respect to country farming, and I appreciate him for that. It's sort of the opposite of classism, and I think there's a classism afoot here, an anti-farmer bigotry from the establishment in Westminster. Here's Clarkson debating the BBC. Take a look.
So why are you here, Mr. Clarkson?
Well, because I'm here to support farmers.
Right. Are you angry?
It's difficult to be angry on somebody else's behalf. That's like being... Yes, no, I'm not angry on someone else's behalf.
Right. So it's not about you. It's not about your farm and the fact that you bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax.
Classic BBC there. Classic.
Is it?
Oh yeah. It's not the fact that I bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax. The fact.
You told the Sunday Times in 2021 that's why you bought it.
These people.
Sorry?
BBC. Okay, let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
I wanted a shoot. Okay, that's even worse to the BBC. I wanted a shoot, which comes with the benefit of not having to pay inheritance tax. Now I do. But people like me will simply put it in a trust. And so long as I live for 7 years, that's fine. And as my daughter said, you will live for 7 years. You might be in a deep freeze at the end of it, but you will live for 7 years. But it's incredibly time consuming to have to do that. And why should all these people have to do that? Why should they?
So one of the reasons Rachel Reeves says she brought this in is to stop wealthy people using it as a way
No,
of
that was the
avoiding...
only reason she did.
Well, no, the other reason was to raise money for public services. Well, have you seen...
Are you listening to this?
Have you tried to get a GP appointment lately?
Yes,
Right.
I just recently had a heart attack.
Okay, so you know it's tough.
Yes.
So where should they get the money from if it's not from farmers?
From farmers. You hear that, everyone?
With
BBC
assets.
thinks you should be paying for everything.
Mr. Clarkson,
Okay,
you
do
know
you
it's
know
not the
how many
BBC's
people
view.
pay inheritance tax in this country?
It's 4% of estates.
What?
4% of estates.
4% pay inheritance tax. 96% of the population of the UK does not pay inheritance tax.
Sure.
After this becomes law, 96% of farmers will.
Where have you got that figure from?
Who here, can I just ask, who here is going to be unaffected by these changes? No one.
Right. Where have you got
I
the
know.
96% figure
Well,
from?
you've got 96%.
Yeah.
Well, the same place that Rachel Reeves does, from the middle of her head.
Right.
From the Sixth Form Debating Society that she was no doubt a member of,
Okay.
which
So-
formed her opinions and yours.
I am not expressing opinions. I'm
Yes.
literally asking you questions. You know that, Mr. Clarkson.
Right.
So, what is your message to this government?
Please back down, please.
And get the money from where?
Well, they've got 40 billion. I'll tell you where you get the. Walk into any of the offices around here. If you don't understand what somebody's job is, fire them.
And how
The civil
far-
service. Civil service is too top. You know that.
How
I must get on.
Hey, I want to get back to one more thing you said, Lewis, when you said that Nigel Farage was not allowed on stage. And that seems odd. I have some disagreements with Nigel Farage, but the man is a fixture in UK politics. He's the leader of a party with seats in Westminster. He led the Brexit revolution, which is an enormous achievement. To keep him out, I find quite odd. And there's some funny things about these farmer protests. I remember last week one of the spokesmen was saying this is not a protest. We're not protesting. We're just going to have a lobby day in Westminster. It was like he was trying to defang the protests. Obviously, the protesters were fairly rambunctious. In Canada, we have something called a National Farmers Union. And it's really just a left-wing group that really is out of touch with ordinary farmers. Tell me a little bit about the organizers here. I give them credit for having a ton of people show up, and the fact that Clarkson spoke so well was wonderful. But is that why Farage was barred? Are they actually sort of namby-pamby centrists?
It's actually so spooky you mentioned that farmers union and speaking about the political infighting within that, because it seems to me that it's the same story over here. We have a national farmers union and they were very much anti-Brexit, and that was their main shtick as well. So I think that might be to do with it, considering that Nigel Farage, of course, headed the Brexit movement. But when he arrived, I have my disagreements, the same with you, Ezra, as well, with Nigel Farage. But when he arrived, he was greeted very well by farmers and by supporters. And the press, of course, swarmed him. I have a clip as well of me capturing the moment that he arrived just at the press box, and everyone was swarming to try and get either a picture or to speak with him and to ask him questions. And of course, his entourage with other Reform MPs turned up, with Richard Tice and McMurdoch, and even you had Ben Habib there, who's a big favourite among Reform voters and others too. So I think there's a lot of internal politics. I don't know the ins and outs, but the NFU is very much, considered quite anti-Brexit. So that could have something to do with that.